of meat exporters who joined fishermen to warn that their exports to Europe were being crippled by post-Brexit customs red tape. In the past 2 weeks, fresh produce worth hundreds of thousands of pounds have been impounded at European ports for not having the correct paperwork. One exporter says with 5 containers worth of fresh pork that has been stuck in Rotterdam for 2 weeks because a veterinary certificate hadn't been filled in correctly. In a moment, we'll speak to Tony Hale. Tony is Managing Director of London-based DH Foods. They're specialists in pork and bacon. First, Peter Hardwick, Trade Policy Advisor at the British Meat Processors Association. Peter, afternoon to you. Good to have you with us. So just explain, if you would, if you can, in kind of Fisher-Price terms, where we're at and what's gone wrong.
Well, it's not necessarily that things have gone wrong. It is an inevitable consequence of leaving the European Union and being treated as a third country. It's absolutely true that there are teething troubles and people make mistakes with paperwork and so on and so forth. But one of the things that is forgotten here is that we've moved into a situation where we're treated exactly the same way as a third country on the other side of the world, which is sending food to this country in frozen form or in shelf-stable form that takes 6 or 8 weeks to get here. This is different. We're shipping goods which need to be delivered within 24 hours of them leaving. Yeah. And to have the same processes for that makes it much more complicated to get this done efficiently and without delay. That's the main problem.
Who didn't spot this then in the small print? Because I could have worked that out. That it's all very well politically saying we're now a third country, and we get all of that. But of course, one of the reasons why Europe trade with us is because of the ability to get stuff there in a faster fashion, because we're on the doorstep.
Yes, you're right. And maybe that's part of the problem. The fact is that the UK has decided, partly to, I think, safeguard food supplies in the UK. And the earlier question about there are no traffic jams at our ports. Well, the answer is we've given the EU between 3 and 6 months grace to submit paperwork and make declarations. So actually, at the moment, their goods are just flowing straight into the UK with no checks at all.
So we've allowed, as you say, good grace, said, OK, while we're putting together perhaps more of the nuts and bolts of what these agreements need to look like and what the paperwork needs to look like, come through, because, we've dealt with you for yonks, so we'll make it all nice and streamlined for you. But that courtesy hasn't been afforded the other way. Is that more or less it?
Well, that is it, but actually the reality is that the EU can't do this, because if it did, it would be accused by countries, other countries deals with acting in a discriminatory way, so it can't. But when that reality strikes home, and I think this is the key point, when that reality strikes home, I think that's the moment we'll be able to sit down with the EU and say, listen, guys, this system does not work for fast-moving, fresh food moving into the EU. It just doesn't work.
And of course, time is of the essence here, Peter, isn't it? Because it's all very well somebody saying, don't worry, within 12 weeks or so, we'll have this thing sorted, and whatever's gone wrong, we'll put right, and we'll make sure there's a system in place. A lot of exporters can't wait 12 weeks. We already know that meat is going bad, that stock has been lost, and this is likely to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Look, some of it is down to learning. And that bit will improve. But the reality is, and I talk to meat exporters all the time. There was one on the news on Friday explaining that he delivers lamb into Rungis Market in Paris. And in the past, he could deliver it into that market in 24 hours. Now, at best, if he gets everything right and there are no problems, it takes at least another 24 hours. And for fresh food, that's a long time.
Yeah. So that's assuming everything is in place. So he's not being impeded, not being stopped. Nobody's questioning the paperwork. So why the, doubling of time? What's happening in those particular cases?
Okay. Right. In the past, and if you've got a couple of seconds, I'll explain this.
Please do.
I've always explained that in the past, we used to deliver goods to Birmingham and Berlin in exactly the same way with a commercial document. Now, very quickly, you need to apply for an export health certificate at least 24 hours before the goods arrive. You need to complete that export health certificate. It can take several hours. You need to pre-notify the border control post at least 24 hours before you arrive at it. You need to make a pre-exit customs declaration to HMRC and pay 50 quid for the privilege. You may need to make an entry customs declaration to the French with a similar sort of charge. You need to stop at the border control post where they check your paperwork. They may open the vehicle to check the goods. That may take several hours because there's a queue of vehicles. And so on and so on. So it's a massive process, right. And that assumes nothing going wrong.
Right. Yeah. So you what one spanner in the works, and the house of cards, to mix my metaphors, comes tumbling down. Peter, thank you. Peter Hardwick is Trade Policy Advisor at the British Meat Processors Association. Let's speak with Tony Hale, Managing Director of the London-based DH Foods. You specialise, Tony, I understand, in pork and bacon, so this is an area you understand well. What's the latest changes, or since January the 1st, what's it meant for you guys?
Well, I suppose as Peter's quite rightly explained, that you can see the detail that's needed with the documentation, and you can have the small list of errors on this documentation, which can hold things up. There is no flexibility with the EU's acceptance on some of the smallest errors on health certificates, which can be words or letters. Something's not correctly written down. Number is incorrect, and that detail we are coming to terms with. We've got to work very closely with the veterinary organisation in the UK to almost, I mean, we feel like we're micromanaging them to do their job properly at times.
Yeah.
So, and we're not vets, you know, I'm a very experienced, I've been in the meat trade 35 years, so I've exported a lot of products over that time, and so these frustrations are just causing disruptions. And then when we get, for example, where we are in Holland, there's a lot of products stocked in Rotterdam Harbour, where it's just, you're supposed to be able to return the goods back if there's something wrong, or and in this case, it's only documentation. There was nothing wrong with the product. Unfortunately, after 3 or 4 days, pork tends to go rotten if it's not preserved or packaged in any way. Yeah. So, because of some of the details that were not correct with the documentation, we've not been able to take the goods to its destination, and we've not also been able to bring it back. They've just tied us up in red tape that we cannot move the trailers.
So essentially impounded the produce for...
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And I'm sure the first week of the year was the worst, and we scaled down our operations so that we wouldn't cause too much congestion, and also put our toe in the water to feel the process. And we've learned so much in 2 weeks, but we are still having some of those problems. But the frustration of not being able to move the goods backwards or forwards is really, it's criminal, really.
I think
we're wasting time, money, energy that should never have happened. So
is this?
frustrating.
Do you sense, Tony? I mean, is it fair enough if you haven't got the paperwork, or do you think, on balance, that, you know, if something is arriving in Holland or in the Netherlands and somebody looks at the paperwork and, you know, for some reason section B, first paragraph A, should have been filled out before the other, whatever it happens to be, I mean, could they wave it through? Are they being? Are they micromanaging this?
Yep, I think certainly what they are, and maybe they were doing that to prove a point in the first instance. We've certainly had mistakes. There is no question in my mind that vets around the country, they're all trying to do the right job, but they will all also have a slightly different interpretation of the documents themselves. I mean, there are hundreds of these export health certificates.
Yeah, I'm sure. And
you find one that's close to what you need, and then adjustments have to be made. And I do feel for the vets, because on one particular health certificate, which could be 4 pages, there might be 20 adjustments that all have to be stamped and initialed and verified, and so that some of it is definitely over the top, but also they have justification when it is completely wrong.
Yeah, indeed, and you know there is a set of rules. Are you hopeful? Just a final point, Tony, that regardless of how awful this is, and you know, we know there's money being lost, there's potentially jobs, livelihoods at stake in this, and even if it is sorted out, but are you confident that at some point it will be sorted out, and in a year's time, we'll just look back at this rather batty 3 or 4 weeks where it went a bit pear-shaped, but actually after that we got things smoothly up and running.
Yeah, I think certainly for what we do, it's just this attention to detail and working together, we will get it sorted out. I'm sure there are so many other examples around the countryside that are so much more complex than we are doing that will take a lot longer. And it feels at the moment that in some areas it's impossible to get the documentation right.
Have you lost money,
just
Tony?
Too difficult. We will have lost some, but we're trying to manage it, and obviously having learnt a lot of lessons in the first week, we're mitigating the losses now by not exporting if we don't think everything is correct.
Yes. So there's a process here, lessons to be learned all round by the sounds of things, but hopefully, and thank you, Tony, for that, we will, as the weeks move on, and again, it cannot be beyond the wit of mankind just to be able to get food across the channel. I mean, that would be ridiculous. Of course you can. Without the economy collapsing, something doesn't add up here. We are, of course, talking about what is happening in terms of exporters, particularly with meat and fish. We talked about meat in the first section there. Let's talk a little more about the fish side of this. Fishy in fish. James Cook is managing director of DR Collin & Son, seafood business based in the south of Edinburgh. He's been at the forefront of yesterday's proceedings in London as well. James, afternoon to you. Thank you for being with us. So you were there protesting yesterday, is that right?
Well, not myself, but we certainly had our vehicles on site.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we got 100% sign up for the drivers. They all volunteered to go and represent the country and our industry.
Yeah.
So they did a very good job. I have to say it was very successful.
So in a nutshell then, where has this all gone wrong?
Well, we've warned government repeatedly for about the last 2 years about, their complacency and their lack of activity from, some of their designing the systems to actually laying the foundation work and actually doing trials with these systems, because they insisted on leaving them till the last minute before they went live. And we did predict that this would be the outcome. We the time and energy we've spent in meetings trying to avoid this issue and minimise the exposure to problems is ridiculous, and we're still now, even yet we're working. We've got 2 lorries loaded here, ready to go here now. We've encountered a new problem today because suddenly our environmental health area with Scottish borders has now been delisted. It's vanished from the list. We can't export anywhere at the moment. I've got the environmental health officer sitting next door ready to get the paperwork ready, and they've vanished from the list. So they're looking at solutions. This is
a whole department has been removed from a list.
Well, the whole county, the whole trading county has vanished from DEFRA's list. Yes, so they're frantically looking. We've been on to DEFRA to try and reinstate it. So these are the type of issues that, because of the live situation, that are thrown at us every day. Last year this was never an issue. You could just fill your lorry, fill in your paperwork, and send it off at whatever time. Now we're faced with hurdles, and they call it a glitch. To quote them, this is called a little glitch. And
is it a glitch?
Those bumping the roads. Well, we don't even know now whether we can actually even. We've actually got a French customs agent to do our customs work, transit documents and everything. We've had to go to France for a solution because we can't get it in the UK, and now we've found another problem in the UK again. So the systems are failing us at every level, and we don't know now. I'm going to have to go through very shortly after this interview and find out now whether the environmental health officer can find a solution for this.
I mean, what's extraordinary, James, and I'm sure this isn't lost on you. I mean, the vote to leave the EU, regardless of how people felt about it and how they voted, was it was now over 4 years ago, nearly half a decade. So there's that, which is a pretty huge factor. And of course, the transition period has been in place. Organisations like yourself, people who know their turf and their territory backwards, attempting to put all their ducks in a row. Where has it fallen down? Where do we point the finger at Boris Johnson, George Eustice? Is it some other department, some other committee somewhere? What, in a nutshell, Who, in a
Well, I
nutshell,
think
do we blame?
Well, I think I agree with your frustrations. I can, we've had equally as bad frustrations. We've been warning them this of years. 2-3 years ago, we went across and opened a French company up, registered it to trade. We got it registered for VAT. We had to actually change a bank. And as anybody in business can tell you, changing banks is not an easy process.
Yeah.
We had to change to a European banking group so that we could do all this. But we were prepared. And yet government keeps on saying the industry is not ready. We've been ready, but government have, as you say, 4 years, we've decided to leave the common market. But some of the things that we're presented with is hilarious. I guess we'll look back on this in a few years' time and laugh about it. But at the moment, it's
well,
it's like a pantomime.
when we discover that it's funny you mentioned pantomime, because the fisheries minister wasn't even able to read the agreement because she was at a nativity play.
Exactly. I think that kind of summarises the situation we're in, and some of the comments in Westminster last week again, inflamed a lot of the people in the industry that are all victims to this. This has been inflicted on the industry. We didn't choose it. It's been inflicted on.
So it's just really been a case, in kind of basic terms, is that you guys were ready. The industry was ready. You dotted the I's, you crossed the T's, but that the relevant areas, the machinery in government wasn't ready. Does that summarise it?
That's correct. Yeah, that's exactly it. They have to look at themselves because they've let us down badly. As I say, we thought we had solutions looking at UK customs, and I think the biggest problem, this was never trialled and tested before the date. And we were screaming out for them to actually do all this, but they were very confident. Oh no, this will work.
But are you exporting and it's getting stopped somewhere, or are you not exporting at all at the moment?
Well, I'll give you an example. We haven't exported a single product this year to the European Union. China and the Far East used to be a big problem for paperwork.
So that isn't an issue so that's not some Mardy, customs man in Rotterdam who's decided, he doesn't like the cut of your jib. It's not even getting that far.
That's correct. We've not even been able to find out the problems that we will incur in France, because we know there will be, but we just haven't been able to test the systems to fully examine that.
So it can't leave this country?
At the moment, we've got 2 vehicles. We don't know now whether they'll go. The drivers have all been tested for COVID, ready to go. We've had to, we're paying for all this documentation. We've got, huge costs behind this. Lorries loaded, and we still don't know whether they're going to leave the country today. So,
James, listen, thank you for speaking with us. I know you're very busy and you got that important meeting to establish the next step of this confusing picture. Let's speak to Martin Leahy. Martin is director of Sailors Creek Shellfish, based in Cornwall. Afternoon to you, Martin. You identify with what you've just heard from James?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, James has hit the nail on the head. He's been quite calm about it. There's a lot of money at stake. We're in our 3rd week now. We haven't earned a penny, and we've laid off over 50 men, oyster fishermen and women.
So you export shellfish to France, to Spain. Whereabouts in particular?
France primarily. Yeah. We also export to China, Hong Kong, Singapore. But primarily, France is our major market.
And you've done this. This is a business that's been going for many years.
Yeah, I've been running my company for 33 years. Wow. I started it as a college project while I was studying naval architecture, and I carried on. But my family have been in it for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this is real legacy stuff. And yet at the moment, it's easier to send something to Beijing than it is to Boulogne.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I would say there's about 8 to 10 steps to export to Asia. And there's, I think, 27 steps to export to Europe.
So you've got customers in France that you've built good relationships with, that for decades you've been trading with, and you're telling them now, you're ringing them up and saying, I'm sorry, I can't give you any shellfish because it can't leave the country.
Yeah, I mean, I've got one customer near Brest. And I went to see him last winter. He pulled out a black book. He said, look, Martin, who's this guy? My grandfather used to buy from this lady in Flushing, and it was my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And he was on the phone to me this morning. Martin, can you send me some Queen scallops? I said, Von, there's no way. The form doesn't exist for us to export.
So you just to put this into some kind of context, Martin, for several decades, I mean, you mentioned centuries, but we can establish what you've just said. Through a couple of world wars, you were able to get scallops over to France. And here we are in the 21st century, unable to get scallops to France. That's the reality.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, this is because of a specific form that the government they haven't designed the form, or the form's wrong. What's happening?
They haven't created it. They've given us a date for the 21st of April.
April?
Yeah. Well, our season finishes at the 30th of March. So, we got 52 men and women who've got out of work until then. And the problem is that the inherent delays now that are built into the system means that it's no longer live shellfish when it arrives, or no longer as fresh as it should be.
Yeah.
So, this is like...
So even if that you had that form, you'd still be impeded to what you were previously able to deliver.
Absolutely. I'm fighting to get the form now, and we're trying really hard. My wife is currently, we sent her on the 4th of January to Paris, and she's over there now negotiating with the French officials to try and get something done.
But the form you need, is that from the British government?
Yeah.
So DEFRA would be responsible for this, one assumes.
Yeah.
So somewhere in an office, I don't want to simplify it too much, and I'm sure you don't need me, Martin, to compound your frustration, but I'm feeling it on your behalf here. So there's essentially a bloke in an office right now who could make this form up and have it happen that isn't doing that.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I'm sure you'll hear a million bureaucratic excuses.
Oh, I'm sure.
Why it can't come forward. But yeah, essentially that's it. If we get this form, we can go to the next stage.
But at the moment, they're telling you that form will not be forthcoming during this season.
Yeah, we had a letter from George Eustace the week before Christmas to tell us that all category B wild caught shellfish won't be able to be exported.
Yeah.
And that's madness to us, because category B shellfish, the value is added by the European companies.
Yep.
So why wouldn't they give an open door to product that they can add a massive amount of value to?
Did you know about this form way back? I mean, a few people have picked up on the fact that, there were lots of ads saying, be Brexit ready. Were you Brexit ready, Martin?
Yeah, I'll give you the extent I was Brexit ready. For 18 months, I've been sitting on emergency Brexit meetings. There was a seafood summit last October in Hull. I went there in my oyster van. I slept in my oyster van for 2 days. And while I went to the seafood summit and attended the emergency Brexit meeting, and I sat on a table next to Jimmy Bucket of, the Scottish seafood fame. And we just, we put our head in our hands after the meeting, and we gave warnings. We've had our Shellfish Association of Great Britain based at Fishmongers Hall on London Bridge, constantly been telling DEFRA, category B, wild caught shellfish, the forms don't exist, get it ready. Now, this just doesn't affect our 50 men down here. We're talking the mussel fishery on the Menai Straits, the cockle pickers in the Boston Wash, Morecambe Bay, and every other hand gatherer or wild caught product in category B water. None of us can export.
So you were Brexit ready. George Eustace wasn't Brexit ready. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, his department, they didn't yet. I mean, it's just an absolute lash up, I mean, the lengths we go to. I mean, my wife last October flew out to Qingdao to the World Seafood Expo so that we could sell our sail-caught oysters and queens to the Chinese, all paid for out of our own pockets. We're not a big business, and these are the efforts we're going to. What efforts are they going to? Well, so they ain't going to any efforts.
Yeah. Well, listen, I hope the tide turns, to coin a phrase on this one, rather sharpish. Martin, thank you. I think we can hear the frustration in what he's saying. It cannot be right that you can get something easier into China than you can into France. That's just a hop over the water.